came as soon as I heard." "Well, where were you?" Phil's mother said, the fine lines of strain showing around her eyes, the way they always did when she had to deal with Phil's father. "Backpacking in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Next time, I swear, I'll leave an address. I'll check my messages." He began to cry. Phil's mum didn't say anything else. She just reached for him, and Phil's heart twisted at the way they clung to each other. He knew his dad was irresponsible and hopelessly behind in his child support, and flaky and a failure. But nobody had ever loved Poppy more. Right then, Phil couldn't disapprove of him, not even with Cliff standing there for comparison. The shock came when his dad turned to Phil before the service. "You know, she came to me last night," he said in a low voice. "Her spirit, I mean. She visited me." Phil looked at him. This was the kind of weird statement that had brought on the divorce. His father had always talked about peculiar dreams and seeing things that weren't there, not to mention collecting articles about astrology, numerology, and UFOs. "I didn't see her, but I heard her calling. I just wish she hadn't sounded so frightened. Don't tell your mother, but I got the feeling she's not at rest." He put his hands over his face. Phil felt every hair on the back of his neck stand up, but the spooky feeling was drowned almost immediately in the sheer grief of the funeral, and hearing things like, "Poppy will live on forever in our hearts and memories." A silver hearse led the way to Forest Park Cemetery, and everyone stood in the June sunshine as the minister said some last words over Poppy's casket. By the time Phil had to put a rose on the casket, he was shaking. It was a terrible time. Two of Poppy's girlfriends collapsed in near hysterical sobs. Philip's mother doubled over and had to be led away from the casket. There was no time to think, then, or at the potluck at Phil's house afterward. But it was at the house that Phil's two worlds collided. In the middle of all the milling confusion, he saw James. He didn't know what to do. James didn't fit into what was going on here. Phil had half a mind to go over and tell him to get out, that the sick joke was over. Before he could do anything, James walked up and said under his breath, "Be ready at 11 o'clock tonight." Phil was jolted. "For what?" "Just be ready, okay? And have some of Poppy's clothes with you. Whatever won't be missed." Phil didn't say anything, and James gave an exasperated sideways look. "We have to get her out, stupid. Or did you want to leave her there?" Crash. That was the sound of worlds colliding. For a moment Phil was spinning in space with his feet on neither one. Then, with the normal world in shards around him, he leaned against a wall and whispered, I can't do it. You're crazy." "You're the one who's crazy. You're acting like it never happened, and you have to help, because I can't do it alone. She's going to be disoriented at first, like a sleepwalker. She'll need you." That galvanized Phil. He jerked to stand up straight and whispered, "Did you hear her last night?" James looked away. She wasn't awake. She was just dreaming. How could we hear her from so far away? Even my dad heard it. Listen. He grabbed James by the lapel of his jacket. "Are you sure she's okay? A minute ago you convinced she was dead and gone. Now you want guarantees that she's fine. Well, I can't give you any." He stared Phil down with eyes as cold as grey ice. "I've never done this before, all right? I'm just going by the book. And there are always things that can go wrong. But," he said tersely when Phil opened his mouth, "the one thing I do know is that if we leave her where she is, she's going to have a very unpleasant awakening. Get it?" Phil's hand unclenched slowly, and he let go of the jacket. "Yeah, I'm sorry. I just can't believe any of this." He looked up to see that James's expression had softened slightly. "But if she were yelling last night, then she was alive then, right? And strong," James said. "I've never known a stronger telepath. She's really going to be something." Phil tried not to picture what. Of course, James was a vampire, and he looked perfectly normal, most of the time. but Phil's mind kept throwing out pictures of Poppy as a Hollywood monster, red eyes, chalky skin, and dripping teeth. If she came out like that, he tried to love her, but part of him might want to just get a steak. Forest Park Cemetery was completely different at night. The darkness seemed very thick. There was a sign on the iron gate that said, "No visitors after sunset," but the gate itself was open. I don't want to be here, Phil thought. James drove down the single-lane road that curved around the cemetery and parked underneath a huge and ancient ginkgo tree. What if somebody sees us? Don't they have a guard or something? They have a night watchman. He's asleep. I took care of it before I picked you up. James got out and began unloading an amazing amount of equipment from the back seat of the Integer. 2 heavy-duty flashlights, a crowbar, some old boards, a couple of tarps, and 2 brand new shovels. Help me carry this stuff. What's it all for? But Phil helped. Gravel crunched under his feet as he followed James on one of the little winding paths. They went up some weathered wooden steps and down the other side, and then they were in Toyland. That was what somebody at the funeral had called it. Phil had overheard 2 business friends of Cliff's talking about it. It was a section of the cemetery where mostly kids were buried. You could tell without even looking at the headstones because there were teddy bears and things on the graves. Poppy's grave was right on the edge of Toyland. It didn't have a headstone yet, of course. There was only a green plastic marker. James dumped his armload on the grass and then knelt to examine the ground with a flashlight. Phil stood silently, looking around the cemetery. He was still scared, partly with a normal fear that they'd get caught before they got finished, and partly with a supernatural fear that they wouldn't. The only sounds were crickets and distant traffic. Tree branches and bushes moved gently in the wind. "Okay," James said. "First we've got to peel this sod off." Huh? Phil hadn't even thought about why there was already grass on the new grave, but of course it was sod. James had found the edge of one strip and was rolling it up like a carpet. Phil found another edge. The strips were about 6 feet long by 1.5 feet wide. They were heavy, but it wasn't too hard to roll them up and off the foot of the grave. Leave them there. We've got to put them on again afterward, James grunted. We don't want it to look as if this place has been disturbed. A light went on for Phil. That's why the tarps and stuff. Yeah, a little mess won't be suspicious, but if we leave dirt scattered everywhere, somebody's going to wonder. James laid the boards around the perimeter of the grave, then spread the tarps on either side. Phil helped him straighten them. What was left when the sod was fresh, loamy soil. Phil positioned a flashlight and picked up a shovel. I don't believe I'm doing this, he thought. But he was doing it, and as long as all he thought about was the physical work, the job of digging a hole in the ground, he was okay. He concentrated on that and stepped on the shovel. It went straight into the dirt, with no resistance. It was easy to spade up one shovelful of dirt and drop it onto the top, but by about the 13th shovelful, he was getting tired. This is insane. We need a backhoe, he said, wiping his forehead. You can rest if you want, James said coolly. Phil understood. James was the backhoe. He was stronger than anyone Phil had ever seen. He pitched up shovelful after shovelful of dirt without even straining. He made it look like fun. Why don't we have you on any of the teams at school? Phil said, leaning heavily on his shovel.